You fall down, you get back up. You fall down, you get back up. Sheva yipoil tzavadu. You fall down, you get back up. You fall down, you get back up. Sheva yipoil tzavadu. Ein shom yesh ba'olam. You know the Heilige Reb Tzaddik said,
Ay 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 da da dum. Ay 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 da da dum. Ay 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 ay. That is the Berditchever Nigun, the melody of the Berditchever, Levi Yitzhak of Berditchev. I, can never forget singing that all through the night with Moshe Storch as we drove through Ukraine on the way to Berditchev and into the cemetery where the grave of the Berditchever Rebbe is, singing his Nigun. I mean, it's just an amazing experience. And there, adapted by Joey Newcomb, to be a line from Psalms that a righteous person falls down 7 times, but he gets back up. And what an important lesson that is for all of us whenever we face the tough times. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we do some beautiful learning? Tonight's going to be great. On a Sunday night, Sharon in New Jersey, James in Indianapolis, Melissa in Great Neck, John in Sedona, Paula in Chicago, Lucy in Minnesota, Kat in North Carolina, Renee in Indy, Debbie in New Jersey, Angela in Ontario, Canada, excuse me, Crystal in British Columbia, Yehudit in South Carolina, Ann in Merced, Rebecca in LA, Patrice in Utah, Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida, PK in Colorado, Belle in Shelbyville, Stephen in New Hampshire, Linda in New York, Eric in Dallas. A few new names tonight. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. Pauline in Chicagoland on vacation. Michael in Scranton. Welcome, everybody. A very tiny Torah thought tonight before we get into our page, because it's a big and exciting page. But a tiny Torah thought, and it's just this. I was sharing this with a relative that, if you consider that you're a person who's doesn't take extreme chances in life, right? You wouldn't go into your retirement having never thought about your retirement. You wouldn't drive a car without a good confidence that the brakes are taken care of. You wouldn't, you wouldn't go onto a ship in the middle of a COVID plague and take a cruise. You're a reasonable person. You're not going to take big, unnecessary risks. Okay, so if you're a Jew and you don't regularly do mitzvahs, and listen, if you're learning with me every day, amazing. You're engaged in Torah study every day. That's like the biggest one there is. You're doing a great job. And so maybe this is a conversation you want to have, with one of your secular relatives who's very disconnected from Judaism. But even for yourselves, if you're just doing Torah study, but for example, you're a man and you're not putting on tefillin, or you're a woman and you're not lighting Shabbos candles. So listen, our tradition has held firm for over 3,000 years that these mitzvahs, these commandments, it's something you gotta do, right? It's just an obligation. You didn't sign on the dotted line. You were born into it. Okay, that's the situation. But the fact is, our people have held firm for over 3,000 years that these are obligations that we have. And we are all souls. We have bodies. We are souls. We are eternal beings made of light. We will return to the world of souls where we came from. And when we do, we believe firmly that we are going to be rewarded for all the mitzvahs we did, all the obligations that are incumbent upon us that we fulfilled, and we'll be held to account for all our transgressions. So since you're, so many generations of your grandparents, their parents, their parents, their parents, all held firm by these rules, why not invest a little bit of time? If you're a man, make sure you own tefillin, wrap the tefillin. If you're a woman, light the Shabbos candles, do more Torah study, etc. Because it certainly can't hurt. It's only going to augment the spiritual level of your life. When you put on tefillin and you end up, doing a little praying and centering yourself and asking God for, to maintain the health of your loved ones and to heal people who are sick, you're going to enjoy that. It's going to be good for you. And it's like you're investing in the mitzvah bank every time that you do that. And by the way, if you're not Jewish, okay, so you have the Noahide commandments. According to our tradition, there are 7 Noahide laws. And really, these are categories, right? Big categories of laws. And among them is Torah. The first Noahide commandment is to know about God, to care about God, to study about God, to learn scripture, to be involved in a class like this. And there are other Noahide obligations that you can fulfill as well. And every time you fulfill these obligations, giving to charity, taking care of the less fortunate, if not with money, then with your time. These are all beautiful, important, good deeds. And it's like a big investment in your future, your eternal future. That's what I wanted to say about that. Okay, today's DAF, we are on page Chaf Aleph, page 21, here in Tractate Yoma. And today we're going to be wrapping up chapter 1. It's been a long journey, 21 pages. Here we are. We're continuing our discussion of the 6th Mishna in chapter 1, and we'll be wrapping up that discussion along with chapter 1 tonight. This 6th Mishnah was a seemingly simple Mishnah. We've already learned that this chapter was generally about the fact that the high priest is sequestered in the temple compound for 7 days before Yom Kippur to prepare him in various ways. And among the things that he has to do to prepare is to get very familiarized with the daily obligations of the priest, because on Yom Kippur, he's going to do practically all of the avoda that's normally sort of distributed out through a lottery to a bunch of the ordinary priests on any given day. All these tasks of cleaning out the ashes, bringing the daily offering, slaughtering the offering, bringing it, sprinkling the blood, etc. He's going to do just about all of the avoda himself on Yom Kippur. So he's familiarizing himself with all of that during those 7 days before. And here in this 6th Mishnah, they talk about at what time in the morning or even during the night they clean off the ashes on the altar where the sacrifices were brought. Of course, when the temple was standing, it was destroyed almost 2,000 years ago, so we haven't been able to do this, but we still study these laws regularly, and particularly we study them on Yom Kippur when we do the full liturgy of Yom Kippur. We actually, it's in the Machzor, in the prayer book that we use on Yom Kippur. We actually learn, we recite everything that the high priest did on the day of Yom Kippur. So we keep these laws fresh in the mind of the population, as it were. That's generally what this 6th Mishnah is about. And so we were yesterday talking about, well, what time do they clean out the ashes? On a regular day at about sunrise, either when the rooster crows, or since there really weren't many roosters in Jerusalem, they had a crier, a temple crier, a priest with a very loud voice who would announce, hey, the sun is up, wake up, priest, it's time to do the work of the temple. When there was Yom Kippur, they would do it much earlier so that everything was set and ready for the high priest on the day itself. And on a festival earlier still, because there was a huge crowd of people who would enter the temple compound to bring all of their festival offerings. Okay, that's where we are. And now we get this amazing teaching, and it's amazing that this is today's DAF. On Friday was Lag BaOmer, right? So late Friday night in Israel, we had this terrible tragedy in Meron, where there was this normally beautiful gathering of so many people to sing their hearts out with tremendous joy, devotion to the Holy One, gratitude to the Holy One who creates us, and just celebrating life and our unbreakable bond with the One who made us. And after the end of that incredibly beautiful singing and dancing that went on at Meron, unspeakable tragedy that we're still processing, we can't understand. So we're not attaching meaning to it. It's too soon. And we're certainly not pointing fingers and blaming this person or that person, this group or that group for that tragedy that happened. Right now, we're still residing in our grief. I mean, we've been reading articles about who was lost. There were children lost, fathers speaking about that loss. It's unthinkable. Okay, it's unthinkable. However, I'm not going to make the connection for you, but it's something to think about as we read today's daf, because one of the teachings today is about when Jews were crowded, right, in the ritual gathering of the festivals, right, of Chagim. In Jerusalem, not at Mount Meron, by the kever, by the graveside of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which is what Meron is. But still, there's a connection that can be made, and I leave it to you to make that connection as we read this. Rav Yehuda said, when the Jewish people ascend to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festivals, they stand crowded. But when they bow to their Creator during the confession, they are spaced so that no one hears the confession of another. And due to the large crowd, they extend even 11 cubits behind the hall of the ark cover, the Holy of Holies, meaning that the whole temple compound, the whole temple mount, was packed with pilgrims during the festival. And yet, even though they were so packed close together that there was barely room to put them anywhere, when they would pray, when they would open their hearts to the Holy One, miraculously, there was room for everybody. They could bow, and when they would recite the confession of Yom Kippur, the person next to them wouldn't even hear it. There was enough space so that they could speak out loud and not be heard by the person next to them. It was as if the Temple Mount miraculously grew in size to accommodate even that packed crowd when everybody's hearts were focused in the same direction, as a kind of expression of unity of the Jewish people, all turning their hearts to the Creator. The Gemara asks, what is he saying in reference to 11 cubits behind the Holy of Holies? And the Gemara explains that this is what he is saying. Even though the crowd is so large that the people extend 11 cubits behind the hall of the ark cover, and people stand crowded, still, when they bow spaced. And that is one of the 10 miracles that were performed in the temple. As we learned in a Mishna, 10 miracles were performed in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple. No woman miscarried from the aroma of the sacrificial meat. As a pregnant woman sometimes craves various foods, and occasionally that craving leads to miscarriage. And the sacrificial meat never putrefied. And no fly was seen in the slaughterhouse, although flies are generally attracted to a place where there is flesh and blood. And the seminal emission did not befall the high priest on Yom Kippur. And no disqualification was found in the Omer, or the 2 loaves, the offering brought on the second day of Passover. That's the Omer. And then we count those 50 days, and then it's Shavuos. We're in the middle of that count now. Last night we counted day 35. That's the day we're in now. And then we're working our way to Shavuos, where we celebrate the revelation of God to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And then we bring the 2 loaves. And yet, one of the miracles was the 2 loaves that were never disqualified. There was never some kind of blemish or impurity found in them. And these are communal offerings. Nor was there ever disqualification in the showbread. The showbreads that are baked, the 12 showbreads that are on the special table in the temple. And neither a snake nor a scorpion ever harmed anyone in Jerusalem. And a person never said to another, "There is no room for me to stay overnight in Jerusalem." No matter how many pilgrims came to Jerusalem, somehow accommodation was found for all of them. That's actually considered one of the miracles of the temple. And the Gemara notes, this list opened with miracles that occurred in the temple. And it closed with miracles that occurred in Jerusalem. Apparently, there were not actually 10 miracles performed in the temple. It seems like there were 8 in the temple and 2 in Jerusalem. The temple is in Jerusalem, but these last 2 were about Jerusalem, not the temple itself. It was, and the Gemara answers, actually, there are 2 other miracles in the temple. As it was taught in a Baraisa, rain never extinguished the fire of the arrangement of wood on the altar, despite the fact that the altar stood in the courtyard, exposed to the elements, right? It's a fire, a fire of wood, a wood fire that they would bring the offerings on. That fire was burning every day on the altar. They fed it with wood from the chamber of wood. So it's a wood-burning fire. And they would put, the sacrifices on it. Now, I can tell you, I've been in Jerusalem when it rains. Like, it can rain hard in Jerusalem. And, if you just had some kind of big bonfire out there in a courtyard in Jerusalem when it was pouring one of those days, that fire would go out. So it's one of the miracles of the temple that fire was never put out, even by the biggest downpour of rain. And with regard to the smoke of the arrangement, even if all the winds in the world come and blow it, they do not move it from its place, and it rises directly heavenward. This is when the temple was standing. The Gemara asks, and are there no more miracles in the temple? Only these 12 that we have named? But didn't Rav Shemaiah teach in a Baraisa in the city of Kalnevo, shards of earthenware vessels were swallowed in the earth in their places, and there was no need to dispose of them. The vessels used for cooking the meat of the offerings of the most sacred order absorbed some of the meat. The meat that was absorbed became nosar when the period during which the offering may be eaten concludes. One was required to break those vessels in which the meat was absorbed. The meat could no longer be eaten since those clay vessels, some of that meat had become absorbed in them. Those vessels couldn't be used for anything, so they had to smash those clay vessels, those clay pots. And then they would just kind of like be absorbed into the ground. They wouldn't have to dispose of those shards of the clay vessels that had become disqualified. And similarly, Abaye said, the crop and feathers of sacrificial birds and the ashes of the inner altar. There was an outer altar in the courtyard, and there was the inner altar in the sanctuary. And the ashes of the inner altar and the ashes of the candelabrum, the menorah, those were in the sanctuary, which were not removed to the place of ashes outside the temple, like the ashes of the outer altar, were also swallowed in the earth in their places. Apparently, there were more than 10 miracles in the temple. And the Gemara answers, the disqualifications mentioned that never occurred in the temple, in the Omer, in the 2 loaves, or in the showbread, were 3 that we consider as 1. So there was never disqualifications in these offerings, but it's the same idea, so we consider that 1 miracle, that there were no disqualifications in these communal offerings. So eliminate 2 from the total and introduced these 2 to complete the list of the 10 miracles. And the Gemara asks, if similar miracles are combined and considered as one, well, then the swallowing of the earthenware, the crops and feathers and ashes are also two similar miracles that should be considered as one. The result being that they are lacking one miracle to complete the total of 10. And the Gemara responds, there is also another miracle. As Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, a great miracle was performed with regard to the showbread in the temple. We've mentioned this before, that the bread was as hot at its removal on Shabbos after sitting on that table for 1 week as it was when it was first arranged the week before. As it is stated, to put out hot bread on the day it was taken away. 1 Samuel 21:7. So these big unleavened breads, we've talked about them, very thick and then folded over, 12 of them. They would be put out on Shabbos, nice and warm, fresh bread, replace the previous week's breads. And when we take off the previous weeks, and they're going to be distributed to the priests, and actually the high priest is going to get a little less than half of the bread, and the rest of the priests are going to divide the rest. And they're going to be as hot and fresh and beautiful smelling 1 week after they were placed there as when they were first placed. And the Gemara asks, and were there no more miracles in the temple? But didn't Rabbi Levi say that this matter is a tradition that we received from our ancestors? The place of the Ark of the Covenant, so that's inside the Holy of Holies, right? It was not there in the second temple, but in the tabernacle and in the first temple, the temple built by Solomon, in the Holy of Holies. What did you find there? The Ark of the Covenant. What was the Ark of the Covenant? It contained the tablets of the 10 Commandments and the original Torah written by Moses. And we also learned that in that place also there was a jar of manna and the broken tablets. And there was a couple, some said there might have been 2 arks, one for the broken tablets and one for the complete tablets. Others say no, it was all in the same ark. And so all these objects were in the Ark of the Covenant, and that was in the Holy of Holies. So what is this other miracle? So the place of the Ark of the Covenant, wait a minute. So didn't Rabbi Levi say that this matter is a tradition that we received from our ancestors? The place of the Ark of the Covenant is not included in the measurement of the Holy of Holies. Based on that measurement, the Ark should not have fit inside the hall. The Holy of Holies is measured 20 cubits by 20 cubits. And a Baraisa states that there were 10 cubits of space on either side of the Ark. Therefore, it was only through a miracle that the Ark fit in the Holy of Holies. And Rabbanai said, that Shmuel said, it was through a miracle that the cherubs that Solomon placed in the Holy of Holies would stand. Their wingspan. Okay, so I got an illustration of this earlier. Let me get this open. This is pretty interesting. Okay, let me open that up. Okay. Here. Oh, why did you do that? What happened? Come on, I just had it. Open. Okay, so here is a drawing. So remember, the Holy of Holies at the time of the tabernacle in the wilderness, so it was just an empty room other than the Ark of the Covenant was in there. But when Solomon built the temple, he sort of doubled the dimensions of everything about the tabernacle, and he made the holy temple much bigger than the tabernacle was. So the Holy of Holies was bigger also. The Ark of the Covenant is distinguished that it was a box made out of wood, but it was lined with gold on the outside, gold on the inside, and the Ark cover had the 2 cheruvim on top, 2 angels with their wings outspread over the Ark of the Covenant. And then one of the other miracles that wasn't a miracle of the temple, we'll discuss that at another time, is that I forget exactly, but like when the people are in favor, when the priest comes in on Yom Kippur to ask for forgiveness for the sins of the nation, if the people are in favor with God, the heads of the angels sort of face out toward the priest and the people beyond him. When it's a time that the people are not in favor, their heads face each other. At any rate, you have these angels figured on top of the Ark cover with their wings outspread. When Solomon built the temple and made everything larger, as we saw, there was only one menorah, one 7-branch candelabrum that was in the sanctuary originally, that came from the tabernacle, the one of hammered gold that was made in the wilderness. But when Solomon built the temple, he added 10 sort of gold copies of that candelabra to sort of fill the space of this much larger sanctuary and to sort of give honor to God by building this magnificent temple, and it's kind of like made everything bigger. So in the Holy of Holies of Solomon's temple, he added, in addition to the 2 angels on the ark cover, let me just get the glare out of the way. You see, I'm sorry about all this glare with the lighting, but hopefully you can see there's the 2 angels on the Ark of the Covenant itself, and then those 2 large statues which represent the same angels but in a bigger scale. Then you see the high priest has entered, and he's got the pan, the coals where he's going to put the incense, and that's kind of smoking up. And the Ark of the Covenant itself has those long wooden staves, which are what was used to carry the Ark of the Covenant in the wilderness. And they have to be long, those wooden staves, because when the Ark of the Covenant is sitting in the Holy of Holies, those wood staves have to sort of poke into the curtain and be visible from the outside. The curtain has these 2 dents in it from the outside. That's why those staffs are so long. At any rate, we see that Solomon built those 2 sort of statues to represent the angels, and their wings were very large, and they shouldn't have fit, right? The Holy of Holies wasn't large enough to accommodate the Ark of the Covenant and these massive angel statues, and yet it did. And so, if you saw like the Harry Potter movies, it was a kind of familiar trope in those movies that, through, in that case, the magic of a fictional world, that you could enter a room which on the outside was small, but once you get inside, there's, a supernaturally large volume inside that room that shouldn't have been available when you looked at it from the outside. And so we have that same idea. Just as the Temple Mount seemed to miraculously expand when there was such a large crowd of people and they could all fit, and then they would have plenty of space to do their bowing and their praying on Yom Kippur. Likewise, within the Holy of Holies, there shouldn't have been enough room for these massive statues of Solomon, and yet there was enough room. That's what we're learning about right now. By the way, those angels on the ark cover, they're called keruvim, right? So keruv, or I'm not sure exactly how to vowelize that, but we normally say keruvim in the plural. So those are translated into English, or, sort of transliterated really, and we call them cherubim, right? In singular, a cherub, okay? So very often when we think of a cherub, so we're thinking of that very cute kind of baby-faced angel, that we often call Cupid in secular culture, the Valentine's Day angel. And he's like a nice baby-faced angel. He's so cute, right? So I don't know where that idea came from. But the Keruvim, they are actually the fiery warrior angels who were stationed outside of the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve sinned. They ate the tree, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that they weren't supposed to eat. And then they were ejected from the Garden of Eden. They would have to, work for a living, earn, by the sweat of their brow, they would eat their bread, and they were not permitted to return to the Garden of Eden. What's going to prevent them from going back the way they came? These 2 fiery warrior angels with their ever-turning swords. Those are the Keruvim. Those are the ones that are represented on the ark cover. So, a cherub, like a cute baby-faced angel, very inaccurate depiction of angels as we understand them from the Torah. We continue. Where am I? Over here. Okay. And that the cherubs, right? It's that word, but again, think warrior angels are depicted there, very large, that Solomon placed in the Holy of Holies would stand, and their wingspan was 20 cubits. And since the length of the chamber was the same, there was no room for the bodies of the cherubs. There were additional miracles. The point is that there were additional miracles performed in the temple beyond the 10 that we initially listed. And so the Gemara responds, the Tana, the rabbi of the Mishna, counts miracles that were performed outside the sanctuary and were visible to all, but he does not count miracles that were performed inside the sanctuary and were not visible to the public. And the Gemara asks, if so, the showbread is also a miracle performed on the table inside the sanctuary and is not visible to the general public. Yet the miracle that the bread's heat did not dissipate was listed among the miracles. And the Gemara answers, the showbread was a miracle performed outside. As Reish Lakish said, what is the meaning of that which is written in Leviticus 24:6? Place them on the pure table before the Lord in 2 rows, 6 to a row. From the emphasis that the Torah places on the fact that the table was ritually pure, it can be learned by inference that it indicates that it could become impure as well. If you say that this table was always pure, so then it would have to have the possibility of becoming impure. Why are they mentioning this? Because a table which is sort of fixed to the ground and never gets moved actually cannot become impure. It's sort of fixed furniture, and that is not an object that can become impure. The Gemara asks, how is that possible? It is a wooden vessel designated to rest in a fixed place and not to be moved. And it was taught any wooden vessel designated to rest in a fixed place is not susceptible to ritual impurity. And it actually serves as a barrier before impurity, preventing its transmission. Rather, the fact that the table is described as pure teaches that the priests lift it in order to display the showbread to the festival pilgrims. And they say to them, see how beloved you are before the omnipresent, as the bread is as hot at its removal on Shabbos after a week on the table as it was when it was arranged in the first place, on the first Shabbos. As it is stated, to put out hot bread on the day it was taken away. 1 Samuel 21:7. Since the table was moved on occasion, it was not considered a wooden vessel designated to rest and therefore was susceptible to impurity. At the same time, it is clear that the miracle of the showbread was a miracle performed outside the sanctuary as it was visible to all. And it was nice that they brought that table outside the sanctuary where the public could see it and smell it, right? If they left it in the sanctuary, the people who came wouldn't get that beautiful waft of fresh baked bread, which was always there, right? Since the showbread remained as hot and fresh all week as when it was first placed there, imagine that when you went to the temple, you know, like you had this beautiful, like two smells would kind of mix together as you enter the temple compound. One was the smell of the incense, at least when it was burned in the morning and the evening. The other was this odor of fresh bread, which seems to have been there all the time. And what is a better aroma than fresh bread baking? The Gemara asks, and are there no more miracles performed in the temple? But didn't Rab Oshaya say, when Solomon built the temple, he planted all sorts of precious golden fruits there. And these brought forth their fruit in their appointed season like other trees. And when the wind blew them, the fruit would fall. As it is stated, may his fruits rustle like Lebanon. Psalm 72:16. And this indicates that fruits grew in Lebanon, which the sages interpreted as a reference to the temple. Why? Because it was built with cedar trees from Lebanon. And when the Gentiles entered the sanctuary, the golden tree withered, as it's stated, meaning when the Gentiles entered the sanctuary. When the Gentiles entered the sanctuary, it was to desecrate it, right? When the Greeks entered in and they ended up sacrificing, a pig on the altar, terrible desecration. And when that happened, or when Nebuchadnezzar invaded and destroyed the first temple, that's when Gentiles entered the sanctuary, was to conquer the temple, destroy the temple, conquer Jerusalem, desecrate the temple, etc. And when that happened, the golden tree withered, as it is stated, and the blossoms of Lebanon wither. And the Holy One, blessed be He, will restore the miraculous trees to Israel in the future. As it is stated, it shall blossom abundantly. It shall also rejoice and shout. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it. Isaiah 35:2. Apparently, there were additional miracles in the temple. And the Gemara responds, the Tana does not count perpetual miracles on the list. And the Gemara comments, well, now that you have arrived at this solution, it can resolve an earlier difficulty as well. The ark and the cherubs, the cheruvim, which, just shouldn't have fit, and they fit there, but they just rested there all the time. That's a perpetual miracle, so we actually wouldn't count that. It was both a private miracle that wasn't seen by the public, and it was ongoing all the time, so you didn't need to count it as one of these perpetual miracles were not counted. The master said, in listing the miracles, that even strong winds were unable to displace the smoke of the arrangement of wood on the altar. And the Gemara asks, and did smoke rise from the arrangement of the wood on the altar? But wasn't it taught in a baraisa? There were 5 matters stated with regard to the fire of the arrangement of the wood. Right, so now we're starting to get a picture of the altar where the sacrifices were brought. And this was not some kind of ordinary bonfire that all day long they just, kept adding wood to it. And when they brought sacrifices, they just threw some meat onto the wood pyre. No. This is another place of ongoing miracle. In what way? But wasn't it taught in a baraisa there were 5 matters was stated with regard to the fire of the arrangement of the wood? The fire crouched above the wood like a lion. Above the wood, not in the wood, not on the wood, but above the wood. The fire was above the wood, and it crouched like a lion. And it was as clear as the light of the sun. It wasn't the kind of orange fire that we're used to when we see, a candle wick burning or fire burning in a fireplace. It was something else. It was as clear as the light of the sun, and it had substance to the extent that it could be felt. It was powerful enough to consume wet wood like dry wood, and it did not raise smoke. So now we're starting to get the picture that this was, it's almost like something you've seen in a science fiction movie, with like an energy, like a liquid energy, like a spiraling light, that would consume the offerings, but it's not. They call it fire, but it wasn't fire. It was like holy fire. It's some kind of clear, but with a substance. I imagine it almost like spectral, like when you look into a chandelier, that kind of, spiritual, liquid, energetic fire that rested over the wood pyre. So then you might wonder, well, what they need the wood for? If it's this kind of holy fire, it's something that it doesn't need wood. The Gemara answers, when we said that the smoke was not displaced, indicating that the wood produced smoke, that was in reference to the fire brought by a person. As it was taught in a baraisa, and the sons of Aaron the priest shall put fire upon the altar, indicating that even though fire descends from heaven, still there is a special mitzvah to bring fire by a person. The fire that the priests brought produced smoke, and the miracle related to that smoke. My friends, you could make a whole hour-long teaching on this idea. In the temple, which was the place where there was a nexus, a union between heaven and earth, the temple was understood to be the axis mundi, right? It's like the place around which the whole world turns, and the place where heaven and earth meet. And specifically, they meet at the altar, where we would bring the offerings to the Most High. And there were 2 kinds of fire involved in that heavenly kiss between heaven and earth. A fire from below, which the priest brought on behalf of the people, the Jewish people and the non-Jews, because remember, non-Jews could send burnt offerings, elevation offerings onto that altar. So it was on behalf of all of humanity. a fire from below, that was an actual fire that consumed wood, and a fire from above, a holy, mystical, supernatural, clear as light, but with substance, energetic, holy fire. And these two fires met. Think of the metaphor for that of our faith, right? Our lives in faith. We bring up our fire from below, and God sends his fire down from above. And our lives intertwine with the fire from below and the fire from above. And when they meet, that's those holy moments in our lives. The Gemara asks, and was the altar's fire crouched like a lion? But wasn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Hanina, the deputy high priest, who served in the temple and saw this, he said, I saw the fire in the temple, and it was crouched like a dog and not like a lion. What does that mean? We have a note here. Rashi writes that a coal or flame shaped like a lion descended from heaven. Others explain that the term like a lion does not refer to its shape, but to its power. The fire that descended from heaven was that much more powerful than ordinary fire. So now Rabbi Hanina, the deputy high priest, is saying, well, it wasn't like a lion, it was like a dog. What does he mean? And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. Here, where the Baraisa stated that the fire resembled a lion, it refers to the fire in the first temple, Solomon's temple, which had many more miracles associated with it than the second temple. The second temple was a dim reflection of the first temple. The first temple existed when we had sovereignty over the land of Israel. The second temple existed when we were beholden to a foreign power, and it was not the same. The fire that crouched like a lion from above was in the first temple. There, where Rabbi Hanina, the deputy high priest who witnessed it, said that the fire resembled a dog, it refers to the fire in the second temple. Now, does he mean that there was no fire from above? The Gemara asks, and was there fire that descended from the heavens in the second temple? Didn't Rav Shmuel bar Inya say, what is the meaning of that which is written with regard to the second temple? Go up to the hills and get wood and build the house, and I will look on it favorably, and I will be glorified, said the Lord. From the book of Haggai 1:8. Even though it is written ve'ekaved, we read it ve'ekavda with an added letter hey. And the Gemara explains what is different that the word is missing the letter hey. This represents 5, the numerological value of hey. And there were 5 phenomena that constituted the difference between the first temple and the second temple, in that they were not in the second temple. So these are the 5 matters that were not present in the second temple. And they are the Ark of the Covenant, right? It was hidden away. We don't know where it is. The Ark of the Covenant is lost. That's why they made the movie, The Raiders of the Lost Ark, because it's lost. Some say, we've read this before, it's in the tunnel, somewhere buried in a hidden chamber in the Temple Mount. Others say it was taken into Africa. Others say it was taken into Babylonia. We don't know where it is. It was not present in the second temple. And the ark cover upon it. And the cherubs, the cheruvim, those angels that were on the ark cover, right? They were missing, right? The ark wasn't there, neither was the cover, neither was the angels. And the fire, right? The heavenly fire on the altar. And the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was not palpably present in the second temple the way that it was in the first temple. And the Ruach HaKodesh, the divine spirit, and the Urim V'Tumim. So that was an object inside the breastplate of the high priest that when the nation had a crucial question like, should we go to war or not? And the king could come to the high priest and say, ask God, should we go to war or not? And using the Urim V'Tumim, the high priest could ask that question of God and get an answer. It was like a hotline to God. Apparently, there was no fire. So among these items that were just listed, the fire was missing in the second temple. Apparently, there was no fire from heaven in the second temple. And the sages say in response, yes, there was fire from heaven in the second temple. However, it did not assist in burning the offerings, but was merely visible above the wood. So that's why we can understand that Rabbi Hanina, the deputy high priest, said that the fire above the altar didn't crouch like a lion, it crouched like a dog. Meaning that in the second temple, you had the wood fire, like regular fire, and they put the offerings on that. And above it, there was some kind of a manifestation from heaven, some kind of holy fire, but it was a dim reflection of what it had been in the first temple. It was almost as if to say, yes, God was saying to us, I'm glad you built the second temple. You should keep bringing your offerings. I accept them, and I want you to know that I accept them. And that's why there is a manifestation of God there, like a small representation. But for anyone who knew what it was like in the first temple, and it was studied, it was recorded, and that's why everyone knew that the second temple, it was a dim reflection of what the first temple was. Meaning that the spiritual state of the Jewish people had dropped at the time of the second temple compared to the first temple. Apropos the fire on the altar, the Gemara cites a related Baraisa. The sages taught that there are 6 kinds of fire. There is fire that consumes solids and does not consume liquids. And there is fire that consumes liquids and does not consume solids. And there is fire that consumes solids and consumes liquids. And there is fire that consumes wet objects like dry objects. And there is fire that repels other fire. And there is fire that consumes other fire. And the Gemara elaborates, there is fire that consumes solids but does not consume liquids. And this is standard fire. It consumes dry items, but it's put out by liquids. Fire that consumes liquids and does not consume solids, this is the fever of the sick. A sick person, his fever dehydrates the body, takes away his liquid, but it does not consume the flesh. Fire that consumes solids and consumes liquids is the fire of Elijah the prophet. As it is written, so this was the big demonstration when Elijah said, because there was all kinds of avodah zarah, of idolatry in Israel. There was a wicked king and queen, and they brought in these idolatrous priests, and they tried to kill all the prophets and sort of, stamp out the religion of Hashem, Judaism among the Jews, a wicked, wicked king. But Elijah survived. And not only that, he challenged all of these idolatrous priests in front of the whole nation on a mountain. And he said, well, let's see whose God is real, right? You bring your offering, pray to your God in front of the people, and have your God send fire to consume the offering. And they brought their offering, and they danced and prayed and cut themselves and manifest their rituals all day long. And of course, the idolatrous priests were a total failure. Then Elijah brought his bull, and he said, and this was after a terrible famine, and it was hard to find water anywhere in Israel, but he said, whatever water is left, bring it up on this mountain and soak that bull. And they poured barrels of water on the bull, and then more water. And then he said, wet it a third time. And then he prayed to God, and this heavenly fire that we're talking about, this light fire, not like orange wood fire, but a clear fire with substance, came from heaven and, set the whole thing, the soaked bulls in all the water, and just lit it up, proving to the people once and for all that God was real. And then the people fell on their faces, and, we acknowledge God, and it was like a return to the relationship with Hashem among the people. That Elijah caused that. Right, the fire that consumes solids and consumes liquids is the fire of Elijah the prophet. As it is written, and fire fell from the sky and consumed the offering and the wood and the stones and the earth, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. That's 1 Kings 18:38. Fire that consumes wet objects like dry objects is the fire of the arrangement of the wood. in the temple, right? That's a fire that consumes wet like dry, is the fire of the arrangement of the wood. There is a fire that repels other fire, and that is the fire of the angel Gabriel. In the book of Daniel, we learn that Gabriel was an angel of fire who descended to the fiery furnace, repelled the fire, and rescued Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who had been cast inside. Gabriel is also the angel who was sent to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah with fire. And there is the fire that consumes other fires, and that is the fire of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. As the Master said in another context, the Holy One, blessed be He, extended His fire between the angels who are also made of fire and burned them. The fire of the divine presence consumed the fire of the angels. That's one of my favorite stories in the Talmud. I believe it's at Sanhedrin 38, and there's a similar story at Shabbos 88. But I think that the one I'm talking about is Sanhedrin 38. And basically it was when God consulted with the angels prior to creating humankind and said, shall I create the humans? And the angels said, what will be the deeds of the humans? And God showed them what the humans would do. And the angels said, whoa, those are terrible creatures. They're going to commit evil and harm each other. Why bring them into the world? And God destroyed all the angels. So the angels are fiery creatures, and the finger, the little finger of God cast out a fire that just destroyed the myriads of angels, the tens of thousands of angels. But then God created another batch of angels and went through the same thing. I'm thinking about creating humankind. They ask what will be the deeds of humankind. God shows them. They say, bad idea. He destroys all the angels. A third batch of angels are created. God says, I'm thinking of creating humans. Those angels say, well, we know what happened to the first two batches of angels. So you're God. The world is yours. You'll do what you want. And so God created humankind. And then history went forward. And by the time of the generation of the flood, where the wickedness of mankind was just so abundant that God needed to destroy all of them with a flood, the angels looked at God like, and God said, what can I do? I love them. We disappoint God all the time, but He loves us. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the smoke of the arrangement, is it so that even if all the winds in the world come and blow it, they do not move it from its place and it rises directly heavenward? Didn't Rabbi Yitzhak bar Avdimi say at the conclusion of the final day of the festival of Sukkot, everyone looks to the smoke of the arrangement of wood. If the wind blew to the south and the smoke tends toward the north, well, the poor people were glad and the homeowners were sad. And this is because it was a sign that the year's rains would be plentiful, producing an abundant crop on the one hand, but on the other hand, the fruit would rot due to the humidity, rendering it impossible to store the abundant harvest. And this forced the landowners to sell quickly at a lower price. So it was good for the poor people and not so good for the landowners. And if a northern wind caused the smoke to tend toward the south, the poor were sad and the homeowners were glad because it was an indication that the year's rains would be sparse. The yield would be low and it would be easy to store the fruit and sell it at a higher price. If a western wind caused the smoke, and now I'm almost done, so get any questions in. If a western wind caused the smoke to tend toward the east, that was an indication that there would be sufficient rainfall to ensure a substantial crop. And at the same time, it would be possible to store the fruit, and everyone was glad. If an eastern wind caused the smoke to tend to the west, that was an indication that there would be a drought, because eastern winds do not bring rain in the Holy Land, and everyone was sad. Apparently, according to this teaching, wind does cause the smoke rising from the arrangement of wood to move. And the Gemara responds, the smoke comes and goes like a palm tree, swaying in the wind, but it does not disperse. Right? You can imagine when a regular campfire is producing smoke going straight up, and then the wind comes, and it just, the smoke kind of scatters all over the place. But the miracle of the smoke produced by the wood, right? So remember, two fires: the wood fire from below, the heavenly fire above. But the smoke from the wood fire from below would go straight up. This is one of the miracles of the temple. And when the winds would blow, so this column of smoke, it would kind of sway a little, but then it would return. It would sway and then return. Sway or sway, but it would still remain a column. And so we see that it was one of the miracles. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 1, and it concludes our discussion of chapter 1 here in Tractate Yoma. Wasn't that an amazing page? This kind of mystical, I don't want to call it a magical mystery tour, but a real mystical tour of the miracles of the Holy Temple. I'm going to make this a key DAF. I should have called it a key DAF to begin with. I think this is a very important day and a very important topic of study. And I'm so glad you were with me as we learned these subjects. Okay, let me check questions. Okay. About the song that we sang at the beginning, Joey Newcomb applying the nigun of the Berditchever Rebbe to the line from Psalms that you fall down and get back up 7 times, and the line in Psalms says that a righteous person falls down and gets up 7 times. Nina's telling me that Avigdor Miller, Rabbi Avigdor Miller, a great rabbi of the 20th century, says that, it's not a proverb, but it's not a psalm, but a proverb, that falling and getting up means that falling and getting up 7 times will make you a righteous person. Not that it's only righteous people who fall and keep getting back up, but if you work on your resilience and that you keep focused on the holy work that you want to do in this world, and every time you fail, you get back up and just start trying again. When once you've done that, failed, and keep going 7 times, that makes you a righteous person, right? That's a beautiful teaching. I said that Lag BaOmer was Friday night, not Thursday night. That's what I said, right? So it was Thursday night, right? It's just that Israel was ahead of us. That's why there was a little bit of confusion. We heard about that disaster, Friday morning, but Lag BaOmer was actually on Thursday night. Thank you for the correction. Caroline, is this why burnt offerings were considered pleasing, i.e. pleasing aroma? Does the fire represent or allude to this more holy type of fire? It's a really good question. What Rashi says about why it's a pleasing aroma is in the same way, that like we tell our kids to do stuff because we know it's what's good for them, even though they don't always realize it's what's good for them. And so sometimes they can't understand why we tell them to do stuff. But if they do it anyway, simply because we told them to do it and they do it, that pleases the parents, right? We cavil a little bit when our kids respect us and trust us and just do what we say because they trust us to tell them what's good for them. Likewise, when God tells us to do something and we do it, it gives him pleasure, right? And that's why bringing offerings creates a pleasing aroma, as Rashi says, simply because he told us to do it and we did it, right? What's amazing about that is that God has told us that he's given us the power, we have the power to please him. He's also told us that God becomes angry at us. So us humans, insignificant creatures, we're so, the comparison of an amoeba to a thinking human being, we are infinitely closer to the amoeba than we are to God, right? God is infinite. The amoeba and we are both finite. So even though we're incredibly more complex and interesting and thinking being, conscious, philosophers, artists, athletes, etc., so much more complex and interesting than the amoeba, but God is infinitely bigger than that. So why in the world would we have the power to please or anger God? And yet the Torah tells us that we have that power. So God has made God's self vulnerable to us. It's the ultimate act of humility. And not only did God give us the power to please or anger him, but he let us know that we have the power to please or anger him. It's unbelievable. What an act of humility on God's part. So now that we know that, shouldn't we go out of our way to do what is pleasing to the one who's given us everything, who's given us life, who's given us a world to live in, who's given us loved ones, who's given us all the blessings in our lives? Wouldn't we want to do anything we could to please him? And as I said at the beginning, we've been given commandments. And when we do what we've been commanded to do, that gives pleasure to God. So let's do it. Yosef, was the string turning white considered a perpetual miracle since it only happened on Yom Kippur? So I would say it would not be considered a perpetual miracle. It's interesting that it's not mentioned among these miracles. I guess maybe because it was conditional. It happened some years, it didn't happen other years, depending on the spiritual state of the nation. It does seem miraculous to me, but it wasn't listed among those 10 miracles. Lucy, how about the fire from the burning bush? Is that the fire of the presence? It did not consume the bush. I would say for sure. It must have been that kind of holy fire. You're exactly right. It didn't consume the bush. It was not the kind of orange fire that burns wood. It was a different kind of fire. It must have been the fire of the presence, this clear fire that has substance, that is a tangible presence, but doesn't consume the wood fuel. Absolutely. I mean, I don't have a source for that right here, but it seems clear to me, just as it seems clear to you, because you asked the question. And PK, Sakara says, didn't God reside in the space between the wings of the angels on the ark and people couldn't see his presence there? Right, so you would say that when the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, with the incense offering, there he would encounter God. Now look, God is everywhere. So does God need to be, having a manifestation of God's self hanging out in this empty room when no one is there? Only the high priest enters once a year. Does God need to have a hangout there? Hard to say. That seems to be like one of the matters that was present in the first temple, but not in the second temple. So maybe God's presence was there. But this fire over the altar that was also there continuously in the first temple, that would also seem to be a manifestation of God's presence. So maybe it's more like that's the Shekhinah, it's more related to the actual presence, and the other is just kind of a miracle caused by God. Now we're getting into matters it's going to be hard to answer. But you're right. Right? At the very least, and that was one of the questions, like, was the presence always there? Or did God sort of cause it to really be there when the priest entered on Yom Kippur? We don't know. We can't answer that question. Perhaps we'll hear more teachings later. I don't have anything, ready to answer your question right now. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. I think that was definitely a key DAF and such a, for me, an energizing day of study of Talmud together. So let's remember, right, Yoma 21. This was a key page, particularly for the mystically minded among us. Have a terrific night. All the best.